Hello everyone, and welcome to our big discussion of the future of Xenoblade Chronicles X. Does it have a future? We've talked about this topic a lot over the last few months on the community tab and here in the comments as well, and I think I know your feelings pretty well. Almost all of you really would like to see a comeback for Xenoblade X. So what I would like to do today is have a look at the main points that I think are important for deciding whether it will be possible to carry X forward to new games. And those are mainly technical issues as far as I see it. So it will get a bit nitty-gritty technical, but it needs to be, otherwise we don't understand why there has not been a port of Xenoblade Chronicles X to the Switch. Why not, people ask? Well, I hope I will be able to answer that question, and once we understand that, I think we can work out what may be possible in the future. First of all, though, is Xenoblade X still relevant as far as its world and its themes are concerned for the current day? And I think it is. It has some pretty timeless topics. The main ones, as I see it, are camaraderie, tolerance and respect for other species, and the very interesting futuristic topic of transhumanism. So that is the idea that the human race can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations, especially by means of science and technology. So I think there is plenty there to engage with. Now, in order to look at the fraught issue of why hasn't X been ported ever, we need to look at the architecture, the computer architecture, I suppose, of the original console it was designed for, and that's the WiiU. And I haven't uncabled mine and brought it here. You've seen it before. I didn't want to disturb my setup with a capture card and everything. And we need to look at the Switch and its architecture. Now, the reason why I have delayed for so long doing a discussion video about this is that only recently we have finally had news via developers who have been given special dev kits by Nintendo that a successor to the Switch is on the way. It's being worked on. Developers are looking into designing games for it, so it should be reasonably well advanced, and the projected date for the new console is sometime in 2024. I suppose it could be as early as the summer, but might be closer to the autumn, I suppose, in preparation for the festive winter season. So that opens up, of course, new speculation and new possibilities. So when we look at Xenoblade X, the game, and the WiiU, there is one quote in particular that has always struck me as really important, and that is Monolith, after the release of the game, commenting that it was a challenge fitting the entire game onto a single WiiU disc, with Kawabata, the head of operations there, the head of the team, commenting that the game, quote, barely fits onto the 32 gigabyte disc. So that shows us that the game itself was almost bursting at the seams. The team was pushing the WiiU as far as it would go with Xenoblade X. Now, there's obviously a wealth of information and documentation available online about the Wii U and any other console, and I have spent some time looking into the finer points of the Wii U architecture. I'm not going to go through all of that. I think it'll suffice to say here that there were recognized bottlenecks with the CPU and the RAM. I will put a load of relevant links to documents and articles and discussion, as always, in the description below the video, so you can follow up and do your own research if you want. Most commentators, to my surprise, actually voiced the opinion that the Wii U for its time was actually pretty well constructed. And those particular bottlenecks mentioned were probably not surprising. RAM would probably have been a really, really sensitive issue, especially for a game like Xenoblade X. So you can see from that I emphasize how the game pushed the Wii U to the limits. In fact, it went so far that Monolith made available a set of so-called data packs via the eShop that you could download. It was a total of about 10 or 11 gigabytes, so pretty hefty. And those data packs provided some preloading of certain assets to make it a bit quicker. But that is the only concession the team made. There is a very interesting interview with the director Tetsuya Takahashi in Time magazine, of all things, and a link is below, which provides a lot of insight into the development process. And Takahashi said that open-world games are often designed with the idea that they'll be installed on hard disk media, but for this game we tuned the engine to its very limits to make it playable without installation, something which I think is pretty innovative. Remember, this is 2015. So there's no problem at all if you're walking or running around the game map, but since you can also fly through the air at high speed, we used the data packs to load part of the game data from storage instead of the disk in order to make it more comfortable to play. So from that discussion, and there's lots more information in that interview, you already see that the developers fine-tuned the game engine on which they designed the game to specially suit the conditions of the Wii U. Just try and think maybe just a little bit like a developer or programmer. Anything that is custom fine-tuned and custom designed and tweaked and whatnot, to port all that over into a completely different code, onto a different architecture, is asking a lot. It's almost like reinventing the wheel. So I've talked a little bit about the Wii U. Now let's just recap the architecture for the Switch. And I'm deliberately showing you here the original model. This is not the launch model. It is the one that came a while after, which was just slightly updated and tweaked, but still otherwise the same design. The OLED came much later. So the Switch came with the Tegra X1 system on a chip. So in March 2015, when it was announced or first shown to the industry, NVIDIA quoted the Tegra X1 to be the first system on a chip to have a graphics performance of 1 teraflop. They showed off Epic Games' Unreal Engine 4. This was, at the time, an astonishingly powerful chip designed to go into mobile devices. 2 years later, 2017, the Switch was launched with the Tegra X1 with lower clock speeds. So by the time the Switch came out, the Tegra X1 was already 2 years old, so it wasn't really super fresh anymore, but it was, of course, a good system on a chip, reliable, well-performing, so they went with that. Over time, as we all know, the performance of the Switch hasn't really been able to keep up with the multitude of games that people wanted to have on the Switch and that developers attempted to port onto the Switch, with sometimes good and often only mediocre results. And that has been a constant bone of contention, and I always check a game before I buy it for the Switch. Is the performance acceptable? Because that has been an issue, we all know that. There's no use beating around the bush. The Switch has a fantastic library, and many developers have done outstanding work getting games to run incredibly well on the Switch. But there is a fair number that did not achieve that goal. So now imagine a medium-sized company like Monolith, who stated in an interview they did back in, I think, 2018, and I will dig out the interview and put the link below. They stated that they considered they didn't have the human resources or technical resources and budget to be able to attempt a huge port like Xenoblade X. The work would be way beyond what they could undertake, they said. It would be practically like remaking the game completely. And even then they weren't sure whether they could get it to run acceptably on the Switch. I am not surprised they hesitated. I'm not surprised at all. If you have played Xenoblade X, and most of you watching this have, you will know the world, the graphics, the gameplay, especially with the skells. Now try and imagine that brought from the ordinary HD it was in, that was 720p, and that was the first time Monolith had ever done work at that resolution. Now imagine that being brought up to full HD and then ported to the Switch. I'm afraid my mind boggles. I can only see the enormity of the project and all the problems. So, the size of the world. According to a video from Nintendo World Report, Xenoblade Chronicles X's map is bigger than Skyrim, Fallout 4 and The Witcher 3's maps combined. Okay, I'm just letting that one sink in, okay? That is one heck of a world map to deal with. Another publication worked out that the map is 3.5 times bigger than Skyrim's map. Now, Eurogamer and Digital Foundry, who you're probably familiar with, and for anything highly technical and a reliable testing regime, I do rely on the Digital Foundry reports. They published a very long article. I will quote from that because it's fascinating, and I hope they don't mind that I quote a bit at length. When looking at open-world games on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and even the WiiU itself, there are scant few that offer a truly stable frame rate. But that's exactly what we have here, and they mean Xenoblade X, because that's the game they're talking about. There are certainly sacrifices that had to be made to get there, but the end result is nothing short of spectacular. For the platform, for the WiiU, with a sublime balance between visual ambition and overall performance. I was stunned when I first read that because I don't recall they often go into hyperbole. Motion blur, for instance, is applied to camera movement and scenery alike, helping to accentuate the fast movement speed of the game. Screen space crepuscular rays are also present, with subtle shafts of light emanating from the sun above, while a basic ambient occlusion, that's a shadowing technique, handles contact shadows below. Animation is a huge step up from the previous game, I mean this one, with characters that feel more connected to the world during exploration sequences, though some of the cutscene animations feel rather stiff in comparison. And that's something that some of you have commented on, I remember. More impressively, nearly every inch of the game world can be explored in full with nary a loading screen, aside from a couple short instances in New Los Angeles, of course. Not unsurprisingly, trades are made in order to deliver this type of seamless experience. One such compromise can be seen in the game's day-night cycle. Xenoblade X makes use of shadow maps, as you'd expect, but these shadows are completely static. And once again, if you've played Xenoblade X, you will probably have noticed that. It doesn't bother me particularly, but if you port a game to a current modern platform, people nowadays expect day-night cycles to have more detailed and nuanced accommodation of these aspects. They also mention that there is a significant amount of object pop-in. Running through the city, you'll see huge skulls and crowds of NPCs appear out of thin air just meters from the player. And that is quite true. And once again, nowadays, people would probably not find that as acceptable as we did back then. It doesn't bother me particularly when I play the game, but I'm playing it with the mental framework of 2015, really. Xenoblade X operates at 30 frames per second with vertical sync engaged at all times, and it manages to stick very closely to this target throughout. It seems that a great number of the aforementioned compromises were made in pursuit of stable performance. Given the results, we feel the team has made the right choice. So overall, that is, in my opinion, a great and completely fair assessment of Xenoblade X performance on the WiiU. Now try and imagine bringing all that across, plus implementing improvements consistent with current day expectations, and I think you will begin to see that the Switch as we know it would very, very likely struggle. Now the other interesting aspect for Xenoblade X is that part of the team at Monolith were apparently also pulled in to work on the upcoming game, the upcoming Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. And once again, the article, Eurogamer Digital Foundry, comment, seeing what has been achieved here gives us hope for the upcoming Zelda title on WiiU. And I have that Breath of the Wild game for the WiiU. Honestly, it runs very well. Yep, I'll stick my flag on that hill. Mr. Takahashi, in an interview, noted when asked about staff being pulled in that Monolith is currently supporting a handful of other Nintendo projects, specifically projects needing map design and interesting adventure elements. Bearing in mind that Monolith Soft previously helped with The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, it seems likely that the latest WiiU installment is receiving support as well. While the team responsible for Xenoblade X is separate from the support team, the experience gained in the creation of the game certainly seems like a good fit for an open-world Zelda title. And considering that Breath of the Wild came out just 2 years after Xenoblade X, it all makes sense, and you can see how the experience probably helped and was funneled into Breath of the Wild. One other technical issue I just want to mention quickly as well, and that is the gamepad functionality on the WiiU. You may have seen it already in one of my Xenoblade X videos, and the highly detailed map on the gamepad and the way you can interact and carry out important menu functions on the gamepad. So it's not just a map, there's a huge amount of functionality built in. Once again, I refer back to the interview in Time magazine, and they mention specifically a highly optimized and customized programming for the WiiU. The rewriting of this code would be an enormous task. Some people have wondered about how this whole aspect of what's on the gamepad, how that could be handled on a modern console where we tend to not have a separate handheld unit. The Switch itself is just one complete handheld. We're all, I think, kind of expecting that the successor to the current Switch is likely to be a similar type of hybrid device. Who knows? Nintendo might surprise us and we might end up with something completely different. But I kind of doubt it, because the Switch has been so monumentally successful. Throwing all that out and doing something completely different just doesn't make any sense, really. They want to build on the foundation of what they have, I would have thought. So can the map functionality from the gamepad be carried over? I've heard some people say they think it would be a major problem. I am actually more optimistic on this issue. I think it is doable. It's obviously a lot of work and some very fine programming, but it should be possible if you're on one screen to simply, with one button press you go onto the map menu and do there what you used to do on the WiiU gamepad. It should be possible. When you consider how you play the game on the WiiU, I don't know about you, but I tend to have my eye usually either on the TV screen, controlling the characters, or I'm looking at the gamepad trying to figure out what to do with my frontier nav sites and probes and where to go next and where is there a tyrant. I tend to be then occupied with that. I don't have 4 eyes, I only have 2, and they're either on the gamepad or on the TV screen. Accordingly, I'd be perfectly happy with one screen that I can switch between the main game screen and the map screen. I guess they could even figure out some way of incorporating some of the gamepad functionality, like dealing with the probes and the resources and the mining there, into a separate menu. There's a variety of possibilities. I'm quite optimistic that that is solvable as an issue, that can be done. So finally, one more important point that we really shouldn't forget about, and that is the sales. Any publisher taking on a project will look at the figures and they will say, I want to see the sales figures for the game that you intend to port. The only ones I can go by that I have available are from VG Charts and a few other sources here and there. There's a good summary on Reddit, which I will link below. Did Xenoblade Chronicles X sell well? Well, I don't think it quite met expectations. The interesting thing is that both the original Xenoblade game on the Wii and Xenoblade X on the WiiU had almost identical sales figures, and that is just below 1 million units. Now that is very respectable. That is not poor sales, but it is not what you would call an outstanding success story, at least not in games industry business terms. There are, of course, a lot of explanations why X did probably not do as well as it could have done if it had been on a different console, because we all know the Wii U was not very successful and does not have a large install base at all. It probably would have done better on a more successful console, but we're going into the realm of guessing here, so publishers want hard figures and projections. So there's that aspect that has to be considered as well when the team looks at the question, do we want to go back to this game and try and bring it into current generation gaming onto a modern console? There are a lot of points they have to consider. So I will just explain briefly what I think the options are for the future. There have been indications that the new 2024 successor to the Switch console, the new console, I don't want to call it anything like Switch 2 or Switch Pro, we don't know yet, that it will have power and performance similar to the PS4 and Xbox One. That is the indications we've been given so far. So that means just one step below what's current gen, really. So that puts Xenoblade X within the realm of possibilities. It would allow full HD, it would allow updating of a variety of libraries, all sorts of things. Do we want just a straight port as is? Well, if they took that decision, I wouldn't say no. I mean, obviously I'd say, yes, please, thank you very much. However, if they said, we're going to take the game, but we are going to update a whole raft of features, starting with the UI layout and the size of the text, and going through a whole lot of other stuff, including maybe even the main character, who is a silent protagonist player avatar a la MMO or MMO style. If they said that and said we're really keen to work this over and now we can do it and do it better, I would say, yippee, that sounds great. Yes, please. Now there's a third possibility. And I think this is the really interesting one, because I'm not totally sure whether the development team really wants to return to Xenoblade X, the game as is, and rework it. They are creative people. Creative people want to move on. They want to have a new project, new ideas, new technology to play with. If they said, we loved working on Xenoblade X, but it's in the past and we're moving on and we're taking the whole IP and the whole franchise forward, then I would say, okay, I understand. It's not my place as a fan to demand something. I have very firm opinions on that, and I think it's important to be respectful of what creative teams want to do, what they want to pour their heart and soul and many hours of work into. That is their decision ultimately. Now, I mentioned there's a third option, and this is the really interesting one for me. What if they took this fantastic world, this breathtaking world of Xenoblade Chronicles X, Planet Mira. That is such a huge asset. Take that world and create a new game, or a game based on some of the ideas and characters of the old Xenoblade X, some kind of mixture, whatever. I think that could be fascinating, and I would love to see what they'd be able to do with that. I'm just thinking in terms of development cycles are so long these days. They've got a ready-made world there that has never been used again, and that's a crying shame, I think. Take that, use it, go forward with it. You've got something there. It just needs upgrading to full HD, and then go wild. Now that's something I could get behind as well. And if they said that's what they like to do, I would say, great, yes please. I also have some ideas about how they could maybe structure the overall gameplay to make it more interesting and accessible to a much broader spectrum of players. So, for example, just an idea, you could separate out a basic and an advanced gameplay option. And for the basic one, you would streamline certain procedures much, much more. Just think of the enormous amount of gear and items you are dealing with in the Xenoblade X world, and how much time that takes up. And a lot of people don't have 100 hours anymore to spend on one game. So we also need to take that into consideration. You know, make it more enticing for people who might otherwise not consider such an extensive game. So there's a whole variety of issues that need addressing and that they could look into, and I bet you all have got some ideas too, so let me know. Anyway, I've talked long enough for today. There's so much more we could talk about, we will talk about, but enough for today. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much, as always, for watching and listening. Please keep well. I'm Food for Dogs. Bye-bye.